Hey everybody, today is a very special day because exactly 1 year ago is the day that I became a Swedish citizen. And having lived my entire adult life basically in Sweden, I've been influenced by Swedish culture in a lot of ways. And I would even make an argument that before stepping foot as an adult in Sweden for the first time when I moved here at the age of 22, I already had a very natural proclivity towards the Swedish way of life, whether it was because I lived in Europe as a kid when my family lived in Germany for a year when I was 5 years old. I always felt like my family had very European values. My father, having both of his parents born in Germany, and my mom's side of the family coming from Italy, if you go back a few generations. So I've always felt very European, and I always felt like I very much fit into Sweden when I came here. I've always been a little bit more of an introvert, at least compared to other Americans. I mean, I do have social sides as well, but I just loved the peacefulness and the respect for other people in Sweden. It's a very nice place to live if you want a calm, relaxed lifestyle where people aren't going to bother you so much. And I felt like as someone that likes to take personal responsibility and have a more relaxing lifestyle, I fit in very well in Sweden, and I could understand their culture and their values when moving here. And then of course, spending so much time here, I've just become even more Swedish in the way that I am as a person. And now I can truly say that I'm pretty much a mix culturally in my personality between being American and Swedish. But there are some ways that I just feel like I will never be completely Swedish, regardless of how much time I spend here in Sweden. There are some aspects of who I am that I always feel like I will identify a little bit more with my American side. And in this video, I'll discuss some of the differences that I've been thinking about with you guys. This first difference that I'm thinking of, it came to mind because recently my parents from the US came to Sweden to visit me and my girlfriend, and they got to meet my girlfriend's parents for the first time. And this was going to be very interesting because my parents are very American, but also have a lot of European values. As I mentioned, having family roots here in Europe. So it was really interesting because one of the things that I noticed with my parents is that they're really good at making conversations lively and fun. When they meet people here in Sweden, it's just really easy to hold a conversation with them. And I think that's one thing that Americans are very good at socially. And it was interesting because speaking to my girlfriend's parents after my parents went back, they said, wow, your parents were so fun and so easy to hang out with, but they still had these European values. And I think there's something to be said about the social culture in America. It's very easy to talk to Americans, whereas Swedes can be a little bit more reserved, especially when it comes to their personal life or deeper topics when you're first meeting them. I remember the last time I was in the US and I took a plane flight and sat next to a complete stranger, an older woman, and over the course of a 2-hour flight, she opened up about her entire life story, and I knew everything about her kids, her medical diagnoses, and everything that she was going through. And Americans have this very openness about their personal lives, and I think that's something that I also have, because I think about how open I've been about my personal life with you guys here on YouTube. It's been a glimpse into my life, and it's always come very naturally to me. And I think that's maybe part of the American culture that I was raised in. And to add to this social aspect, I've found myself in Sweden oftentimes being a social connector because I'm so open outwardly, just naturally. Even though my personality can be a little bit more introvert at times, I would kind of consider myself an omnivert, someone that can do both. That might not be the word, but if you do know the word, let me know in the comments section. But I've always had an easy time inviting new people into things. For example, my girlfriend and I hosted a party several months ago, and she invited all of her friends, and I invited all of my friends. And it seemed like most of her friends, or a big portion of her friend group, they all knew each other. It was sort of like their childhood friend group, or people that have spent a lot of time together. Versus on my side, all the people that I invited, it wasn't from one sort of friend group. It was people from all different groups. I knew this person from the gym. I knew this person from work. I know this person from the language project that I'm working on. I met this person at a bar, and I met this person on Instagram. And everyone came together, and because my friends are all quite international, I would say, in Stockholm, they all just sort of mixed. Whereas I feel like with Swedish gatherings, it'd be less common for someone to invite all different types of friends from all different places that you've met them and have them hang out in a single place. It made me think of one of my friends who grew up in France as a Swedish guy. And when he became older, he moved to Stockholm to rediscover his Swedish roots. And this is one of the most social people I know. So fun to hang out with. You hang out with him and you go to a party and he'll meet everyone. He'll be the life of the party. And I just genuinely love spending time with him and being around him. But he was telling me it was difficult for him to find a party to go to on midsummer because everyone's midsummer parties, they would only invite people from their childhood friend group. And that was sort of mind-blowing to me. And I think it goes to show that even for someone super social and outwardly where it's very easy for them to meet people, there is this sort of boundary of like, these are my friends that I grew up with, our childhood friends that go way back, that I went to preschool with or high school with, and we've developed these relationships over a long period of time, and someone that's new coming into the group. Whereas in the US, I don't think that would have made as big of a difference, and I think it would have been much easier for him to actually find a party to go to. The next difference I want to discuss is my views on sort of personal freedoms versus the group collectivism that is oftentimes very prevalent in Sweden. America is a land that is very individualistic, and people pride their ability to make choices for themselves above many other things. We sort of pride ourselves on being the land of the free, even though in reality, most countries that have democracies have freedom in the way that we would define it in America. But in terms of actually personal freedom, I think Americans really value the ability to make decisions for themselves and not follow the sort of group mentality that we oftentimes have in Sweden. Let me give you a few examples to explain a little bit more what I'm talking about. So like in Sweden, we have Systembolaget, or the state-run liquor store. And a lot of Swedes, they really like it and they support it. And I'll admit, Systembolaget is a great run store. But I don't think as many Americans would appreciate the fact that they can only buy their beer and wine from one specific place that's closed on certain days of the week and has certain opening hours. But support for Systembolaget in Sweden is extremely high. Another example could be when it comes to politically some people's stance on maternity and paternity leave. For one thing, I think it's great that fathers in Sweden have access and the ability to take paternity leave if they would like. But one of the things that is sort of a debate in Sweden at the moment is if the fathers should be required and make it mandatory to take a certain number of days for paternity leave. And for the good of society, and having equal rights and equal pay between men and women, I can see there are some good arguments there for implementing some mandatory paternity leave days. But in my own sort of political opinions, I really value the ability to make those sort of decisions for yourself or between your family members. I'm quite libertarian in my viewpoints, sort of that everyone should be able to do what they choose and what they think is right for themselves as long as it doesn't harm anyone else. And I don't really like the idea of a government or a big group of people telling me how I should make decisions in my own life. And I think that might go back to my American cultural roots. In Swedish society, they have this concept called jantelagen, that you're not supposed to stand out or think you're anything special or deviate from the common opinion and belief that everyone has in society. But as an American, I find myself really unafraid to stand out and think differently and do things differently. And I'm not saying this goes for all Swedes because everyone's different. Everyone has different philosophies and views of the world. But I do find that this group mentality and collectivism is very prevalent in Sweden. Now I want to talk a little bit about taxes, because Sweden is far and away a country that has very high tax rates across many different categories. And the amount of taxes a country collects is closely related to a culture's ideals between individualism and collectivism. If a country is more collectivist, then more people should pay higher taxes and contribute to the common good, versus a more individualistic country where everyone should stand for their own health insurance or paying for school or those types of things. That's going to be more of an individualistic value. If I look at the actual tax rates that I pay in Sweden now versus what I would be paying on a similar salary in the US, the difference is really quite huge. And if I take a valkompassen in Sweden, or basically a quiz that says which way I would vote, My results that I've taken, especially recently, are really leaning towards the blue end of the spectrum, or the more sort of conservative parties in Sweden that would advocate for less social services and lower taxes, versus the red parties that want to have higher taxes and offer more services. There are some services in Sweden that I really appreciate, like having free healthcare for all. That is pretty amazing. And the fact that college is paid for in many cases, or is at least a lot cheaper than in the US. But there are also a lot of ways that Sweden uses tax money where I just don't feel like it's warranted. And again, I think this goes back to sort of my libertarian mindset of like, okay, let's cover the basics: fire, police, healthcare, make sure that society is running and functioning. But there's a lot of extra benefits and services that I think benefit a lot of people, and you can make arguments for why they're important, but I would just lean towards the side of maybe having less of those services. Whereas in Sweden, the most voted for party, historically, if you look back at the last, 30, 40 years, it is the Social Democrats, a red party that wants to have a strong welfare system in place. And if you look at even further left of that, you have Vänsterpartiet, or the left party in Sweden, and their political views are even further on that left-hand side. And I think for Americans to see their political views, it would be really quite shocking. So I think it makes sense that I gravitate towards the blue end of the Swedish political spectrum, having been born and raised in America, and being in a country that does lean more left than my childhood country where I grew up. It makes sense that I tend to skew a little bit towards the right. One thing I will say though is that I always try to take in the opinions and news and research from both sides. And politics is actually a topic that I really enjoy discussing with people, even though it can be sort of taboo in a lot of countries culturally. Overall though, I do think it's very interesting to look at the political landscapes of Sweden versus the US and see exactly how they actually differ. I also think it's interesting that I sort of have this very natural hustle instinct of wanting to become the provider in my relationship and wanting to work more and earn more. And I think that is a very American mindset of trying to hustle and work hard and get ahead. The Swedish work-life balance is very nice, and people can have a very comfortable, stable lifestyle. But when I think about my goals and what I want for myself, I don't want to live a normal average life. So I'm always hustling to sort of try to get ahead. And I think that this is sort of ingrained and instilled in me culturally. The last difference I want to point out in this video has to do with the language. And this is my accent, or my brytning. They say that if you move somewhere or you start learning a language after the age of around 13 or 14, it's very difficult to actually pick up that language without an accent. And for me, I feel like I will always have my American accent to some extent when I'm speaking Swedish. With that said, I'm very happy with my Swedish level. I feel like I can communicate easily with people in my day-to-day life in Swedish. If you're trying to learn Swedish, just like I have, you're gonna love our community for Swedish learners on School. This community is completely free, and I'm hosting live lessons every month, as well as tons of pre-recorded material like vocabulary quizzes, stories, and more to help you take your Swedish to the next level. As I said, it's completely free, so go ahead and check it out with the link below in the bio, and I hope to see you in there. With that said, guys, I'm curious what you found most interesting about this video, or if there are some ways that you feel I'm still way more American than Swedish. Maybe there's something that I missed. So leave some comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. And with that, I hope to see you in another video soon.